All right. Hello, you guys. So, topics 5.3 to 5.5 on this lecture video. All right. So, enduring understanding, agriculture has changed over time because of cultural diffusion and advanced technology. Pretty easy to remember. We can skip this image here of tractors. So, how did we get from just human labor working hard, our ancestors in the past to using machines? So, let's take a look. All right. Uh, 5.3 for the first one. All right. Identifying major centers of domestication of plants and animals is the first learning objective in 5.3. So just to remind ourselves, agriculture is the deliberate modification of Earth's surface for cultivation of plants and rearing of animals to obtain sustenance or economic gain. So remember what agriculture is. All right. So for these three topics, we're going to be looking at three major agricultural revolutions. Each one has had a significant impact on the way humans get their food and how we, therefore, how we live on the planet. The first one we're going to be looking at is the first agricultural revolution, otherwise known as the Neolithic Revolution. This started somewhere between 14,000 years ago when humans around the globe started moving from nomadic hunting and gathering tribes into sedentary agricultural societies. And sedentary, again, means, settling in one place, making that place a permanent home, right? So that's what I mean by sedentary, all right? The first agricultural revolution is a crucial step in the spawn of civilizations, cities, okay? But to kind of, sum it up, right, the first agricultural revolution was basically, right, when humans first domesticated plants and animals and stopped relying and being, a hunting gathering society, nomadic society. And to define things even more, domestication just means, the deliberate effort to grow plants, to raise animals, make plants, and make animals adapt to our needs, right, human needs. So yeah, also using selective breeding to develop desirable characteristics, right, for plants and all that. So yeah, I mean, this is relatively new. In human history. For thousands of years before this, right, humans lived as foragers, right, plant-based diet. They ate small animals, right. They lived in nomadic groups, but now that's all changed with this quote unquote revolution. So again, sedentary just means to stay in one place, right, and making that place a permanent home. Right, during the first agricultural revolution, people were building more durable homes, possessed goods that didn't have to be light enough to transport to a new area. Farming practices improved over time as farmers learned to plant seeds from their strongest plants to generate more productive crops. Right, again, selective breeding. Right, new tools and practices. Right, oxen to pull plows. Right, the use of irrigation, and over time, larger settlements began to grow and take shape. So this led to new forms of social organization in human society, right? As there were ruling classes that arose, so a certain group of people calling the shots, right? Cities developed, but at the same time, right, there were the beginnings of societal conflict, right? So instead of tribes, right, you've got different towns, different cities, beginning to fight more, whether that's raiding for more food or just having a ready fighting class. Okay. So yeah, society changes at the same time, right? The first agricultural revolution doesn't just deal with these new practices, right, and improvements. It also deals with the fact that because there's more food, humans are able to focus on other things like woodworking, pottery making, and also focusing on non-food crops, right, like cotton. Okay. So yeah, think about it, right? If you're living in one place, right, it means a reliance on that one place, right, rather than exploring and while farming and herding promised a steadier food supply, right, these activities also decrease the variety of foods consumed, right? So the human diet uh, started changing into the multiple staple crops that we think of today, right? Things like wheat, for example, or rice. Again, prior to the advent of agriculture, humans needed to obtain food through hunting and gathering, right? And that usually involve groups of less, 50 people or less, all right? But that said, today only about 250,000 people, practice hunting and gathering. They're living on the farthest margins of society. So a modern example are the Bushmen, right, uh, of Botswana. Okay. So, origins of agriculture, can't really be documented with certainty. There's been a bunch of theories and studies done, right, from scientists, archaeologists, geographers, historians, and really it's hard because it all started before recorded history. So some of the reasons why the first agricultural revolution kind of took place, that shift from hunter-gatherer societies to sedentary, lifestyle is possibly because of the end of the most recent ice age, right? People adapted to the changes in the environment, right, by domesticating animals and plants to ensure a steady food supply. People migrated and settled in warmer environments where more foods were available, right? And because of that population grew and that increased pressure on the environment, wild foods became scarce, right? And that again requires cultivation of a stable crop, stable surplus, stable food, right? Possible cultural factors here: the desire to establish sedentary communities, discovery of agriculture, right? So maybe it was experimenting rather than an accident. Okay, so various reasons why. Um, So yeah, I mean, some of the first animals domesticated were sheep and goats, right, for milk. We know that. And here you have the beginnings of your main culture, agricultural hearths, right? For example, people in Southwest Asia beginning to plant seeds to secure a plant food supply, right, in the new climate conditions. Okay. So yeah, some of the practices you have at this time include seed agriculture, the reproduction of plants through annual planting of seeds that result from sexual fertilization, right? So you've got wheat, barley, right? Another is vegetative planting, aka root cropping, right? Is the reproduction of plants by direct cloning from existing plants, such as cutting stems, dividing roots. The earliest vegetative agriculture appeared in Southeast Asia and probably involved, root vegetables like taro or yams. Okay. And then here we've got, some of the first animals domesticated, right, in Southwest Asia, right? That area is credited with domesticating many of the most important stock animals, right, like cattle, goats, pigs, sheep, right? Horses were domesticated in Central Asia, right? And their modern diffusion largely follows the diffusion of the Indo-European family language, which goes back to Unit 3, right? So with those examples, let's look at some of these agricultural hearths, right? Kind of the big main point here of 5.3. One of the important points, right? Identifying agricultural hearths. And early hearths of domestication of plants and animals arose in the Fertile Crescent, for example, the Indus River Valley, Southeast Asia, and Central America, right? Each areas were different crops. I don't know why it says crops there, and began to domesticate plants and animals, right? So each area here is called an agricultural hearth. So again, scientists have identified several major hearths, over time, and that continues to change with new studies, whether it's by scientists or archaeologists. Okay, so here are some of your major agricultural hearths, right, in these areas. So the Fertile Crescent, hearth of early agriculture and early civilization, and it's most credited with Southwest Asia. So in that Tigris-Euphrates floodplains, right? It forms an arc from the eastern Mediterranean coast up to into what is now Turkey. So people of this region grew wheat, barley, have wheat there again, rye, and legumes and domesticated sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. Okay, and this diffused throughout the Middle East into Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Africa. So again, some examples for you here. Right, wheat and lentils. Okay, so this is kind of the area, the Fertile Crescent that is being being discussed here. There we go. All right. Second here, Southeast Asia. People here raised pigs, grew sugarcane and root vegetables. Here began around 7,000 BCE. Sorry about that. There's some sound. Right, so domestication here began around 7,000 BCE. Another hearth is in north central China. So just north where millets, hemp, and wheat were being grown. But really in Southeast Asia, you've got rice, mango, coconuts, being grown and all that. South Asia is another agricultural hearth here. Was thriving in the Indus River Valley from about 2,500 to 1,700 BCE. Farmed wheat, barley, peas, sesames, and cotton. Domesticated animals include cattle, fowl, pigs, camels, and buffalo. Right, so there you've got the Indus River Valley. Central America, right? The agricultural hearth here began about 8,000 BCE. People here grew sweet potatoes, beans, and other crops, domesticated the turkey. Maize becomes the staple of this region, or maize. Another hearth begins in the Andean highlands of South America, where beans, tomatoes, and potatoes are being grown, and llamas, alpaca, and guinea pigs are being domesticated. So really, this agricultural hearth in Central America diffuses into North and South America, right? And then lastly, you've got sub-Saharan Africa, right? In East Africa, crops like coffee, olives, peas, yams, and sesames originate around 8,000 BC. In West Africa, people are raising millets and sorghum, right? And the diffusion, is into Southern Africa. So here's some of the agricultural hearths here for you, right? Central America, the Indian Highlands, West Africa, East Africa, right? The Fertile Crescent. What's being grown in these areas here, these hearths, right? It's important to know. And again, think about the climate in these areas. Another example for you. Again, Fertile Crescent here, barley, cattle, lentils, right? Southeast Asia, you've got, pigs, rice, coconuts, and bananas. Central America here, maize, squash, sweet potato, beans, cotton. All right. I think, of course, this is from your book here, and you can kind of see the diffusion of these hearths, right? Okay. So still 5.3, another learning objective, right? Explaining how plants and animals diffuse globally. Okay, so it's pretty easy to explain that. One of them is migration, right? People migrated for various reasons, right? Over the course of history, right? Including population pressures, different opportunities or conflicts, right? So forced involuntary migration, if you can recall from Unit 2, right? Travelers, people who migrated, right, introduced agriculture to new areas, by relocation diffusion, right? So they introduced, some of, the domesticated animals or agricultural practices, right? Crops, right? So new goods, services, plants, and agricultural practices were brought, and whether it's through migration or trade, on the Silk Road or the Columbian Exchange, right? I mean, all of this is still continuing today. Just maybe it's not in the way we expect, right? So yeah, I mean, it takes a while for all this to happen. Here's one example for you. I mean, one study of archaeological sites in Southwest Asia, so that Fertile Crescent in Europe, suggests that agriculture will spread steadily from Southwest Asia to Europe at a rate of about 0.6 miles, right, over a period of 3,000 years. So, I mean, you can picture how long that takes, right, for some practices, right, and agriculture to spread. Okay, another example for you here to think about, rye, right, that spread to Northern and Eastern Europe from Southwest Asia. Oranges, for example, spread from Malaysia to East Africa through trade, migration. Right, so here's a map that kind of, pictures, right, the diffusion of agriculture and certain domesticated animals, right? So from here to to Europe. Right. So you can see how long it took for foragers to adopt farming methods, right, in Western Europe, right, at about 5,700 BCE. All right. So continuing that, we're going to be looking at the Columbian Exchange specifically, right? So patterns of diffusion, right, such as the Columbian Exchange, resulted in a global spread of various plants and animals. So the Columbian Exchange is essentially the exchange of goods and ideas between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. It begins after Christopher Columbus lands in the Americas, not in the Americas in 1492. So, this, basically facilitated the global diffusion of plants, animals, diseases, human population, culture, technology, and ideas. In other words, the whole Columbian Exchange is the reason for this, quote unquote worldwide trade network, of various plants, animals, etc. Right. Let me actually go back one slide here. Oops. That's not what I meant to do here. Okay. So yeah, actually, I should explain more before I show you all that. So where was I? Yeah, by the 15th century, many domesticated plants and animals spread through Africa, Europe, and Asia. I explained that. So yeah, I mean, Columbus's arrival, not only impacted, what kinds of plants and animals were being, eventually grown and traded and eaten in the New World and the Old World, but also it impacted the indigenous peoples of the Americas when Columbus arrived, right? So when the Old World made contact with the New World, right? I mean, there were no immunities to diseases from the Eastern Hemisphere at the time, right? For a lot of the natives in North and Central America, like smallpox and malaria. And not only that, but if we're moving away from agriculture, there was also a global diffusion of millions of people, right? Think of the forced migration of enslaved people from Africa, all right? So yeah, we could go to the next slide here. You can see some of the things that are being grown. So I mean, you've got what is it, right? Coffee bean, peaches, pear, banana, sugar cane, right? Things also from all the way back here, right? Being coming into the New World, right? The New World to the Old World. You got things like sweet potatoes, avocados, peppers, right? Tomatoes, corn being coming over to Europe. Okay. So yeah, crops from the Americas like maize and potatoes were eventually widely popular and adopted in regions in Europe and Asia and Africa. One, because it was easy to grow because climate conditions were similar, but also, people liked it, right? And that led to a population explosion. Over time, some crops from the Americas eventually dominated the diets of many people in the Eastern Hemisphere. So 7 out of 10 countries is the statistic I saw that rely you have 7 out of 10 countries, that rely most on maize for their daily caloric intake in Africa and Asia. People in Europe and Asia and Africa, these countries, these people, right, are the top 10 consumers of cassava and potatoes in the world. Right, the Columbian Exchange also transformed the Americas with European crops. For example, the fields of wheat covering much of the Great Plains in the present U.S. Replaced native grasses. The ranches of the American West and South American pampas are home to cattle and sheep, right, introduced by the Europeans. So lots of impacts, over time. All right, and again, another slide for you there. So yeah, diffusion of agriculture today obviously continues, and people have developed a worldwide system of agriculture with global markets and expanding tastes because of scientific advances. So improvements in transportation and communication technologies have created a variety of goods that can be offered all year round, right? When traditionally they were only available seasonally. So that's why we can have berries all year round, right? So here's an example for you of, producers seeking new consumers for their products, right? Kiwi fruit, right? Transplanted to New Zealand from China, where it grew well and became popular. So there you go, kiwi originally from China. And just something fun for you here to see, right? Growing seasons calendar, right? What can be grown, certain times of the year. All right. So that took a while. But now the second agricultural revolution. All right. And the second agricultural revolution is the mechanization of agricultural production, advances in transportation, development of large-scale irrigation, and changes to consumption patterns of agricultural goods. So the objective here is to explain the advances and impacts of the second agricultural revolution. So new technology and increased food production in the second agricultural revolution. Here's the key takeaway in the beginning, right? It led to better diets, longer life expectancies, and more people available for work in the factories, right, or urbanization. So, that's essentially the impact of the second agricultural revolution. But let's get into the specifics. All right. The agricultural hearth of the second agricultural revolution is Great Britain or England, right? We'll say Great Britain. And the reason why it kind of starts here is because of a wide variety of things, but such as such things as capital, right? I mean, Great Britain was pretty powerful at the time. With the resources that they had and the naval power that they had, right? They were able to invest in and help farmers and other people wanting to make advances, right? They had enough labor, they had enough people that were willing to work, and obviously land, right? They were rich. One could say lucky, right? With coal that was present, right? And the fact that they're an island, they've got plenty of water, plenty of rivers. Okay. But anyways, the second agricultural revolution, a change in farming practices marked by new tools and techniques that diffused from Great Britain and the Low Countries starting in the early 18th century. And again, diffuses from those regions, right? Britain and the Low Countries. So the second agricultural revolution sees dramatic improvements in crop yields, innovations like more effective yokes for oxen, and later the replacement of oxen by horses, and later the replacement of horses by new machines, right? But new technologies were able to replace those, allowing food production to increase. And we also see advances in fertilizers and field drainage systems. All right. But before this, way before this, there weren't much improvements in agriculture. I mean, there were attempts to continue to document how people were growing food and raising animals and all of that. But even then, the growth of food wasn't growing exponentially, let's say. Okay. So the agricultural revolution kind of starts off with the enclosure movement, or the enclosure acts, we could say, right? And the enclosure acts were kind of passed by the British government in the 1700s, and the enclosure acts, which eventually became laws, right, allowed landowners to essentially fence off land formerly used as common pasture or communal farms, right? So the map on the left here, right, shows a British farming area in the 1700s. And the shaded areas are common pastures, right? So, communal land, right, that the community can use. The map on the right shows the same area in 1800, but the common pastures eliminated by fences, right? So all of this, right, on the right is being owned, I should say, by one individual, or a private company, right? So that said, the enclosure system, changed the way farms were organized, and was a major driver of the second agricultural revolution, because it used to be that most agriculture was done by peasants who were growing food for themselves on communal land. But once Britain switched to the enclosure system, this system, the communal lands, as you saw in that map there, were replaced by farms owned by individuals, and use of the land was restricted to the owner and tenants who rented the land, right? So if you need to hear that again, you could go back, right? But the enclosure system essentially gave individual rich farmers, right, their own land, and marked a shift from agriculture from clustered rural settlements to dispersed rural settlements. And again, this is happening in the 17th and 18th centuries. So growing industry, the decline of feudalism, and the enclosure system kind of leads to urban migration, because as as individuals and private companies at the time are owning the land, right? Um, on one hand, it leads to more effective farming practices, because owners have control over the land, but at the same time, it's pushing peasants out of the land, which is why you've got urban migration, right? Former farmers are going to move to the cities looking for work, and this causes a jump in food demand for farms into cities. So that also led, those individuals who now own the farms to, you know, to to find ways to grow more food, right? And with demand, right, comes innovation, right? So it's kind of a twofold thing, a twofold consequence of the from the enclosure system. On the one hand, you've got poor farmers being pushed out to the cities, because they can't find a work, and at the same time, right, there's a labor surplus in the cities because you have so many people. So that also leads to the industrial revolution, right? Kind of gaining traction, right? And if you don't know, the industrial revolution, was happening almost at the exact same time as the second agricultural revolution, a little bit after, one could argue, and eventually it saw the numerous technological inventions, and the growth of the development of factories, and the growth of cities, right? So basically, the technological world as we kind of know it today, not exactly iPhone wise, but uh, but definitely some advances there, right? Anyways, you can see the enclosure acts here, just another example of what it might look like for you. What it might look like, I should say, not for you. Okay. Anyways, second agriculture, my bad. We see numerous innovations. We see the seed drill. We see better collar for oxen. We see the use of horses instead of oxen. We see improved crop rotation, new fertilizers, field drainage, irrigation systems, so on and so on. And all of these, again, increases yield and encourages a population boom, right? While at the same time, needing less laborers in the farms. So crop rotation, right? New methods that prevented soil exhaustion and increased yields. The Norfolk four-field system, right? This involved the yearly rotation of several crops, including wheat, turnips, barley, clover, and ryegrass. The rotating of crops added nutrients to the soil, making it unnecessary to leave a field unplowed for a year. That's super important to remember this four-field system, which is one example, right, of crop rotation, right? So yeah, one specific example is the seed drill, um, made by Jethro Tull. This shortened the time needed for planting, right? It was important because it meant farmers no longer had to scatter seeds by hand, which was time consuming. And doing that by hand is that practice is a little potentially wasteful, because if seeds don't land in the plowed furrows, right, or aren't evenly distributed, right, that could lead to a poor growing season. And the seed drill kind of eliminated that. So you have the seed drill here. Down here you have the mechanical reaper developed by Cyrus McCormick. Basically mechanized harvest grain, so you could collect all of this grain here, for example, with this machine. Then you've got the first steel plow, right, developed by John Deere. Basically made it easier to plow in deep and tough soil. So I mean, an example for you, think about taking out weeds, right, in the back garden, right, or in the backyard, by hand, right? Pretty tough. The steel plow, though, when it was first invented, right, was meant to fix that. Again, right, to make it easier to plow in deep, tough soil. Okay. Again, got the seed drill here. There you go. You've got the the mechanical reaper. Okay, so plenty of other examples here. So yeah, good to know some of these innovations, specifically the seed drill and the McCormick Reaper. And you can see just some of the effects that these had. Okay. So again, with the second agricultural revolution, with these innovations, you know, the advances in agriculture, with the enclosure acts and the enclosure system, the overall effect is that, you know, we've got more food. There's more food being grown, right? Which means, you know, more nutritious diets. People are you know, live longer. Farms could simultaneously grow bigger and produce more food and require fewer people to work the farms. And again, this allows farmers to move towards the cities and work in factories, you know, to find economic opportunities. And that kind of spurs the industrial revolution as people are moving into the cities. And you know, with that, right, with the industrial revolution, you got advances in communication and transportation, things such as the railroads, right, that invention. This allows food that's being grown at the same time to be transported into greater distances, creating a larger market for the higher yields of the second agricultural revolution. So, one last time, mechanization of farming means more productivity and less farmers necessary to work the fields. All right, again, increased more reliable yields, increasing young people migrating, right? You have more goods, right, because of the second agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution, like fabric and clothes being produced faster. And this meant a need for more raw materials, right, and meant cheaper prices on goods and a global increase in grain production. Okay, so before industrialization, right, and the second agricultural revolution, you know, you've got a good amount of people, you know, working the land intensively here. And then, you know, with the development of machineries, obviously later almost perfected, right, afterwards. Okay, that's a blank slide there. So last topic here, the Green Revolution. Okay, so let's talk about the Green Revolution. The learning objective here, explain the consequences of the Green Revolution on food supply and the environment in the developing world. So the Green Revolution, basically a large increase in crop production in developing countries achieved by the use of fertilizers, pesticides, and high-yield crop varieties that began in the latter half of the 20th century. All right, and again, 20th century, 1900s. So the Green Revolution, some of the characteristics here, you know, the use of high-yield seeds, increased use of chemicals, and increased use of mechanized farming. So, you know, this all kind of starts with advances in plant biology in the mid-20th century, which led to higher yielding, disease-resistant, fast-growing varieties of grains. Right, and the biggest advances were achieved in you know, rice, corn, and wheat crops. All right, the Green Revolution allows more farmers to double crop, so which means grow more than one crop per year, and increase use of fertilizer and pesticides in developing countries. Right, but the third agricultural revolution / the Green Revolution kind of starts off in the United States with one man, and that man is Norman Borlaug. Okay, so something else, one last thing to add here with the Green Revolution, we see the further mechanization and development of new technology. Okay, but yeah, the architect of the Green Revolution is Norman Borlaug. He helps Mexico produce more wheat in the 1940s. Right, he worked for more than a decade there to develop a disease-resistant strain of wheat and to convince Mexican farmers to plant the seeds. Eventually, he goes into South Asia, right, India, where increased harvests, where harvest increases fourfold in India and Pakistan, right, where he helps out. So yeah, some of the, we could say the, what's the word I'm looking for here? The science behind the Green Revolution. We can start off here with hybrids or seed hybridization. It's a tough one to say, seed hybridization, right? So seed hybridization is the process of breeding together two plants to have desirable characteristics. And this is what Green Revolution scientists, one of the more science-specific things that they focused on. So in the 1960s, scientists created a new strain of rice by combining long grain Indonesian rice and denser grain Taiwan dwarf rice, and that led to longer and denser rice. All right, so that's an example of seed hybridization. Some of the more science-specific oh darn, I lost a word here, right? Some of the more science-specific techniques here, or creations, developments, advancements, is genetically modified organisms, GMOs, which kind of began in the 1970s. It's the process by which humans use engineering to change the DNA of a seed. So, for example, scientists, they added a gene from a bacterium that is a natural pesticide to crops like potatoes, cotton, and corn. Right, so that's an example of GMO. So today, most corn, soybeans, and cotton grown in the United States are GMO varieties. Right, they increase yield and they resist diseases or pesticides. Right, and when I say pesticides, right, we're referring to avoiding certain insects, invasive insects. Right. Machinery is another characteristic. Advancements in machinery is another characteristic of the Green Revolution. Right, proponents of the GR encourages the transfer of mechanical technology like tractors, tillers, broadcast seeders, and grain carts. Right, these machineries assisted in production, challenged traditional labor-intensive farming practices. Right, not to mention electricity. Right, greatly aided crop storage and preservation and enhanced livestock raising and dairy farming. Okay, so again, some of the specifics involved with the Green Revolution include seed hybridization, genetically modified foods, right, the use of machinery. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about some of the positive impacts of the Green Revolution, right? You've got higher yields, right? Increased crop yield, right? Using the same amount of land, and those proponents of the Green Revolution, those who see it in a more positive light, will tell you, that the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, helped stave off hunger and famine, reduced world hunger, and food insecurity, which is definitely true. I would say. The Green Revolution was most successful in Latin America, South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. And you can just see here, right, from the UN Food and the UN FAO here, right, just how positive, right, the Green Revolution was in terms of, wheat production increased, corn production increased, rice increased, right, potatoes within 40 years, and that's quite a bit. Other positive impacts here include, food prices, higher yields, and increased production to falling food prices. So, with more food that's cheaper, right, that eases economic stress in developing countries. I've been there twice, right? Another positive impact is the fact that, there's more money for research and business, right? High rates of investment in public and private sectors. U.S. universities got grant money from the government to research, on seed hybridization, fertilizers, pesticides. And lastly here, greater income opportunities for some rural farmers and, cost of certain crops drop, right, if there's increased availability. So that being said, there are some negative impacts of the Green Revolution. You got environmental damage, lack of sustained investment, disregard for local needs, increased yields and application of human-made fertilizers, put a strain on the land, double cropping, right, intensive land use, right, that's where it falls under, and more aggressive irrigation led to soil erosion and degradation. And intense land use and irrigation drained the land of its natural nutrients, which meant greater need for fertilizers, right? And with a greater need for fertilizers, right, you're going to introduce more chemicals to the environment, and that results in in potentially hazardous runoff into streams. That's supposed to say streams, my bad. Streams, rivers, lakes, etc. Right, and all of that goes without saying, poses a danger to the local ecosystems, habitats, and communities. So, for example, it pollutes drinking water. So, not only that, but the machinery involved that's needed to successfully complete some of the practices of the Green Revolution, right? Some of the machinery require vast amounts of fossil-based fuel. And if we're talking about gender roles, much of the the practice of the Green Revolution, the knowledge that was shared in developing countries, had traditional practices, agriculturally speaking. And because they in these developing societies, there are more traditional gender roles. Men got Green Revolution technologies and wielded the power, right, to complete some of the to reap the benefits of the GR. But because of that, women often became excluded from learning the new methods and were further marginalized, even though traditionally speaking, right, in these countries, women do much of the agricultural work, right, the labor-intensive work. Other negative impacts here, right, increased mechanization reduced the need for human labor as agricultural workers became displaced. So basically, when human labor is required, it's usually in the form of migrant workers. Some of the technology of this revolution is dominated by multinational corporations, making producers vulnerable to the company's marketing and sales practices. And that one's kind of complex. For instance, one multinational company sells crop seeds that resist one of its pesticides that encourages farmers to buy the seeds of the pesticide, which can then be used to kill weeds. However, the corporation does not allow farmers to preserve seeds from one year's crops for the next year's planting. Okay. Environmental impacts here. The Green Revolution crops have increased growers' demand for water, and that's caused regional inequities and the need for more water development projects. So, think of, the Aral Sea, right, and the history behind that, and the practices of the Soviet Union. Large facilities run by corporations require large amounts of energy. Increased research and production means increased production costs, right? Machinery, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides become more expensive, and that expense is passed on to the farmers, right? Labor markets, changed in less developed countries. Typo there again. So again, the whole rural to urban migration, where fewer farmers are needed in developing regions, so they move into the cities. Multinational corporations moved manufacturing to Vietnam, China, India for relatively cheap labor. And culturally speaking, right, you've got the loss of farming methods, and the education behind that, and changes in traditional diets. Okay, so there are kind of three strands, so to speak, of the Green Revolution, right? Types of changes here, right? Innovations and consequences. So, the biochemical strand of the Green Revolution, right? You've got hybrid seed selection, use of fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, right? That leads to increased yields, weeds and pest control, right? Increased cost for farmer, possible environmental degradation, right? You can look at this chart here on your own. But yeah, here we go, you guys. You can see, the kind of the positive and negatives in a nutshell of the Green Revolution. Okay. Other criticisms, by the way, included that the Green Revolution hasn't taken hold in Africa for various reasons. Why it hasn't. Some companies have made sure their GMOs produce terminator seeds, right? You could look that up, but it means farmers continually have to pay for new seeds every year by some of these companies that are helping out these farmers, quote unquote, helping out. All right. So, a long lecture here. There's quite a bit to examine here. But again, just look at the the learning objective, making sure you get a sense of what the the main point is. And again, I would recommend you guys look at the CED, the course and exam description. Okay. But again, identifying agricultural hearths, understanding the Columbian Exchange, right? Understanding that the second agricultural revolution, led to more people working in factories, how it leads to longer life expectancy, right? The enclosure system, the impact of that. And of course, just understanding, right, the benefits or the positives and negatives of the Green Revolution. All right. Anyways, Let me know if you have questions, you guys. See you next time.